What kind of pain makes a woman build a cabin alone in the freezing Montana wilderness? That question grabbed Jacob Hartwell's heart every time he saw her. Jacob sat on his horse along the pine ridge, watching the woman below. She wore a worn brown coat and dragged a heavy log across the frozen ground. The November air bit at her cheeks, and her breath rose in small clouds. She worked without slowing, notching timber with skill that most men took years to learn. No neighbor came to help, no wagon stopped on the trail, no friendly voice called out. It was only her and the half-built cabin rising stubbornly against the wide Montana sky. For 2 weeks, Jacob rode past the ridge each morning. Each time he told himself he would keep riding. Each time he stayed. Some unseen pull brought him back, day after day. Watching her made something inside him ache, something he had buried beside his wife 2 years earlier. The woman, Sarah Brennan, that was the name, whispered around town. She moved with a fire inside her, a determination that wrapped around her like armor. She paused only long enough to warm her hands over a small fire, her face catching the light. She was young, but hardship had sharpened her features into strength more than softness. Jacob recognized that look. It was the same one he had seen in his mirror after Margaret died. The look of someone holding on because letting go would mean falling apart. Why was she alone? Women did not build cabins by themselves in this territory, not unless life had pushed them into a corner so tight that working alone seemed safer than trusting anyone. Jacob's horse shifted restlessly, snapping a branch under its hoof. Sarah's head lifted quickly. She looked straight toward the ridge, her eyes finding his across the long stretch of land. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Jacob's pulse kicked hard. Then, he pulled his horse back behind the trees and rode away, as if caught doing something he shouldn't. Down below, Sarah tried to keep working, but her hands trembled slightly when she lifted the next log. 3 days later, the storm rolled in. Wind tore across the land, pulling at the tarp she had stretched over the open roof frame. Snowflakes, thick and heavy, began to fall. Sarah fought to secure the canvas, hammering nails with shaking hands. The storm was moving too fast, and she was losing the battle. A sound cut through the wind, hoofbeats. She spun and grabbed the rifle propped beside the cabin frame. A rider appeared through the wall of white snow. It was him, the quiet watcher from the ridge. He led a pack horse loaded with supplies. He stopped near the cabin, climbed down, and began unloading without asking permission. Nails, rope, strong canvas, bundles of firewood, dried beef wrapped in burlap. "I don't need charity," Sarah said, raising the rifle. "Not charity," he replied. His voice sounded rough, like someone who hadn't spoken much in a long time. "Just neighborly sense. Storm will tear that canvas away before midnight." "And what's your price, neighbor?" Her voice held suspicion sharper than her rifle barrel. He looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes showed something she recognized, a loneliness that matched her own. Her grip eased, and the rifle lowered an inch. "Just let me work," he said. They worked side by side in silence, while the storm built around them. Jacob's movements were steady and sure, like a man who had spent years working with his hands. He secured the tarps with strong knots, placed support beams where the structure was weakest. Snow collected on his hat, and his coat grew white at the shoulders, but he didn't complain. By nightfall, the cabin was shielded well enough to survive the storm. The wind screamed over the roof, but the walls held. Jacob tied off the last rope and headed toward his horse without a word. "Wait," Sarah said. He turned. "Who are you?" "Jacob Hartwell." "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell." He nodded once, mounted his horse, and rode back into the blizzard. Sarah stood in the cold, watching him disappear. The wind howled, but inside her chest, something quiet had begun to stir. A stranger had helped her, asked for nothing, and left without waiting for praise or warmth. She whispered into the empty night, "Why would you help me? Nobody helps me." At his ranch, Jacob rubbed down his horse with numb hands. His foreman, old Moses, watched him from the barn door. "Boss, you almost smiled just now," Moses said. Jacob didn't answer, but they both knew it was true. He had spoken more words to that woman in 1 hour than he had spoken to anyone in 6 months. Sunday morning came cold and sharp. At Timber Creek Church, Jacob took his usual seat in the back pew. His mind wasn't on the sermon. It was on the ridge, the canvas tarps, the look in Sarah Brennan's eyes. Sarah entered the church late, heads turned. Whispers filled the room. She sat alone in the front row, separated from everyone. Clara Whitfield, the town's most influential woman, leaned toward her daughter and said loud enough for all to hear, "Some women have no shame, building homes in isolation like that. What proper woman lives alone?" Jacob clenched his jaw. The words stirred something protective deep inside him. He tried to focus on the sermon, but his thoughts pulled him backward. 2 years ago, Margaret had been sick, feverish. He had waited to fetch the doctor thinking she would recover. She didn't. He lost her. Lost their unborn child, too. Since then, guilt wrapped around him like iron chains. He kept people at a distance. The ranch ran smoothly, but his home was quiet, cold, hollow. After the service, Clara positioned herself near the church steps, ready to judge. Sarah walked past her with her chin held high, ignoring the whispers. Many watched, waiting to see if Jacob would speak to her. His heart pounded. It would be easier to stay silent, to walk away and keep the walls around his heart strong and unbroken. But silence had cost him enough already. Jacob walked across the churchyard and stopped in front of Sarah. He tipped his hat. "Miss Brennan." She looked surprised. "Mr. Hartwell. Storm didn't knock your walls down." "No, it didn't." "Thank you." He nodded and walked away, but the whole town had seen it. Clara's eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. That afternoon, Jacob did not ride to the ridge. He rode directly to Sarah's cabin. She watched him approach from the porch. He got down from his horse, picked up a saw from her tools, and met her eyes. "If you'll have the help," he said, "I'll help you build." Sarah studied him, weighing danger and trust. He didn't push. He didn't speak again. He simply waited. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Then you better know how to notch timber properly." For the first time in a long time, Jacob felt something shift inside him. He didn't know if it was hope or trouble, but he was no longer just watching life from a distance. He was stepping into it. The days that followed changed the rhythm of life at Willow Creek. Jacob arrived at dawn each morning. He worked beside Sarah from sunrise to sunset. They spoke little at first, but their silence felt natural, not tense. The sound of saws, hammers, and wind through the pines filled the space between them. The walls rose higher. The cabin began to look like a real home, not just a frame fighting the weather. The work was hard, but it gave Jacob something he had not felt in 2 years: purpose. And Sarah, who had learned to trust no one, found herself watching for Jacob's horse each morning, almost against her will. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, they shared a small meal near the fire. The flames lit their faces, and the world beyond the cabin felt far away. "Your husband build before?" Jacob asked quietly. Sarah stared into the fire for a moment. "Ben? No, he was a ranch hand. He died in a range dispute last year." Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed pain she rarely let anyone see. "The town blamed him," she continued. "Said he caused trouble. I inherited the shame. No one wanted to hire me. No one wanted to help. So I came here to start again, alone." Jacob nodded. He understood more than she knew. "The town is good at blaming," he said softly. The next morning, a heavy silence hung over the land. When they went to the woodpile, Sarah stopped suddenly. Half the timber she had cut was gone, stolen in the night. Panic hit her like a blow. That wood had taken days of work. Without it, her progress would fall behind. Winter was coming, and she needed the cabin finished to keep her land. Her face turned pale. "I can't lose this place," she whispered. "I'll find it," Jacob said. "It's not your problem." He shook his head. "It is now." Jacob saddled his horse and followed the tracks through the snow. 5 miles out, he found a camp of 3 drifters. Laughing around a fire, the stolen wood stacked nearby. They were drunk, bold, and careless. Jacob faced them alone, his tone calm but cold as the snow around them. He left no doubt in his warning, and the men quickly decided the wood was not worth the trouble. He hauled every log back to Sarah's land. She was waiting, anger replaced by relief. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes," he replied, "I did." That night, Jacob barely slept. He dreamed of Margaret again. This time, she stood in the doorway of a cabin that never was, holding the child they lost. He woke in a cold sweat, guilt heavy on his chest. Was helping Sarah a betrayal of his wife's memory? He could not shake the thought. The next morning, he arrived at the cabin, quieter than usual, distant. Sarah noticed at once. She set down her hammer and faced him. "Grief isn't betrayal," she said in a steady voice. "The dead don't want us to stop living too." Her words struck deep. Something cracked open inside him, and he felt the truth of it. He gave a small nod, unable to say more, and returned to work with fresh focus. 2 days later, the storm hit without warning. One moment the sky was clear. The next, white wind swallowed the land. Snow whipped through the cracks of the unfinished roof. Temperatures dropped fast. "Inside!" Jacob shouted. They hurried into the half-finished cabin and sealed what they could. The wind screamed outside, shaking the walls. The small stove barely warmed the space. They wrapped a single wool blanket around both of them and sat close by the fire. The storm trapped them together for 2 full days. There in the quiet, with the wind howling outside, walls between them fell one piece at a time. They talked, not in long speeches, but in honest truths. "Tell me about him," Jacob said softly. "Your husband." Sarah stared at the flames. "Ben was flawed, quick temper. He made bad choices, but he was kind to me in his way. I loved him, but he's gone and I'm still here. I don't pretend he was perfect." She looked at Jacob. "What about your wife?" Jacob's voice came low, like a man confessing something long buried. "Margaret. Fever took her. And our baby. I waited too long to get help. Thought she would recover. I was wrong. I saw life leave her. Since then, I've watched life around me without taking part in it." He looked down, his voice breaking. "I watched you build from that ridge because maybe I'm only good at watching." Sarah turned to him. "Then stop watching and start living." Her words hung in the dim light, a challenge and an invitation at the same time. Jacob looked at her, really looked, and something inside him shifted. He leaned in and kissed her, careful, unsure, but real. Sarah hesitated for a heartbeat, then kissed him back. The cabin was unfinished, the wind still howling, but inside there was warmth beyond the fire. Neither spoke after. They didn't need to. Morning came clear. The storm had passed. They worked side by side, aware of the new space between them, a quiet bond they did not name. At noon, Moses rode up, concern on his face. "Town's talking," he warned. "Clara Whitfield is stirring trouble." It did not take long. That week, the town council gathered in the square. People surrounded Jacob, their eyes cold with judgment. Clara stood proudly at the front, Vernon Nash beside her with a smug grin. Vernon had wanted Sarah's land since her husband died, and now he saw a chance. "Jacob Hartwell," Clara said loud enough for all to hear, "we are concerned about your association with certain people. Our town has standards. A proper man should not keep company with a woman of damaged reputation." Sarah heard it. She had come to town for supplies and stood near the mercantile doorway. She waited for Jacob to defend her. He opened his mouth to speak, but years of protecting his reputation held him silent. He hesitated, and that one small pause said everything. Sarah's face changed. Her eyes lost the quiet warmth she had let herself feel. Without a word, she turned, mounted her horse, and rode away. Jacob watched her go, regret clawing at his chest. By afternoon, Vernon Nash filed a claim against Sarah's property, using old debts and a technical rule. If the cabin was not finished and lived in within 2 weeks, she would lose the land. Jacob tried to visit her, but she spoke through the door, her voice flat and tired. "You chose them over me. Leave, Jacob. We're done." He left with his heart in pieces. Days passed. Sarah worked alone, exhausted, injured from a saw slip. The cabin still unfinished. Her chance to keep the land was slipping. Jacob drowned himself in work and whiskey. Moses watched him with disappointment. "You spent 2 years dead inside," Moses said. "She brought you back to life. Now you're choosing the grave again." Jacob had no answer. 10 days remained. Sarah was running out of time. Snow fell in gentle, steady flakes as Jacob Hartwell stood by his wife Margaret's grave. He had come alone, desperate for clarity. The wind was cold but calm, as if the land itself was listening. "I loved you, Maggie," he said softly, the truth shaking inside him. "I'll always love you. But I'm still alive, and I've been choosing wrong. I've been choosing fear, choosing to stay dead inside." His voice broke. "She makes me feel alive, and I think you'd want that for me." Speaking those words felt like unlocking a door he had kept locked for 2 years. He touched the headstone with gentle fingers, as if saying goodbye to the pain, not the memory. He left the cemetery with a new purpose. Jacob rode straight to town and pushed open the saloon door where the council sat talking. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Jacob slammed papers onto the bar. "Vernon Nash's claim against Sarah is built on lies," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Ben Brennan's debts were paid. I have the receipts." Vernon scoffed. "This isn't about land. It's about morals." Quote, "No," Jacob said, his voice firm. "This is about cruelty dressed up as righteousness. Sarah Brennan is worth 10 of you, Clara. She is braver, stronger, and kinder than anyone in this room." The saloon fell silent. Jacob looked around at the crowd, many of them familiar faces he had known for years. "If you want to judge her, judge me too. I stand with Sarah Brennan." The room shifted. Clara's supporters looked uneasy. Others, people who respected courage more than gossip, nodded. The blacksmith stepped forward. "I'll help finish that cabin," he said. "Me too," another rancher added. One by one, voices joined. Not everyone, but enough to matter. Moses stepped beside Jacob with a proud half-smile. "Well, we riding or talking?" At dawn, a small group rode to Willow Creek, Jacob leading, Moses behind him, followed by the blacksmith, 2 ranch families, and a few ranch hands. They brought tools, lumber, food, and willing hands. Sarah stood outside her cabin, exhausted and pale, a bandage wrapped around her palm. She held her rifle, unsure what this gathering meant. Jacob dismounted and met her eyes. "I was a coward," he said. "I didn't stand for you when it mattered. I'm here now. All of us are. Let us help you finish your home." The men behind him waited. No one pressured her. They gave her the choice. Sarah looked at Jacob, then at the group. Fear flickered inside her, fear of hope, but she pushed it aside. She gave a single small nod. "Then pick up a hammer." 3 days of hard, honest work followed. Snow melted under the warmth of sawdust, sweat, and laughter. The cabin rose stronger than before, not just built, but supported. The roof went up. Floorboards were set. A door was hung straight and true. The community ate meals together around the fire, sharing stories and warmth. Children played near the creek. People who once whispered now worked side by side. Sarah and Jacob moved around each other with quiet understanding. Their words were brief, but their actions spoke louder. Trust was being rebuilt, not with promises, but with effort. On the 3rd afternoon, just as the final touches were being placed, Vernon Nash arrived with 4 hired men. He sat on his horse with a smug grin, papers in hand, gun on his hip. "This property is still under dispute," Vernon called out. "You're all trespassing." The workers stopped. Tools suddenly felt like weapons. Tension filled the air. Jacob stepped forward. Moses moved to stand with him. "The only trespasser here is you, Vernon," Jacob said calmly. Vernon's hand slid toward his gun. The moment stretched tight, 1 second away from violence. Sarah stepped between them. Her voice was strong and steady. "This is my home. I'm not leaving." She held up the deed, freshly stamped and sealed. The cabin behind her stood complete, proof of residence and hard work. The sheriff, who had been quietly observing from his horse, finally spoke. "Council reviewed your claim, Vernon. It's denied. You have no right here. Vernon stared at the united faces around him and saw defeat. He yanked his reins and turned his horse. This isn't over, he muttered. Yes, Jacob said firmly. It is. Quote. Vernon rode away, anger trailing behind him like dust in the wind. As the sun lowered, helpers packed their tools and rode home, leaving Sarah and Jacob alone in the quiet warmth of the finished cabin. Lantern light glowed against the log walls. It felt like more than shelter. It felt like a new beginning. Jacob stepped inside slowly. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I'm still scared. Sarah swallowed, her voice soft but honest. So am I, but we build it one day at a time, like the cabin. He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. He pulled her close and kissed her. Not uncertain, not stolen, but chosen. Outside, the first stars appeared in the cold Montana sky. Inside, two hearts finally moved forward, not from loneliness, but from hope. Spring came bright and full of promise. The cabin's windows wore simple curtains. A small garden grew out front. A corral held Jacob's horse close to the new home. On Sunday evenings, Moses and the ranch hands came for supper, laughter replacing the silence that once lived in Jacob's house. That morning, Sarah and Jacob walked to church together. Some glares remained, but their weight no longer mattered. Younger families smiled in greeting. Acceptance wasn't complete, but it was growing. That evening, on the porch as the sun dipped low, they talked of adding another room someday. Maybe children. Maybe more land. Not because they were escaping the past, but because they were building the future. You ever regret the hard way? Jacob asked. Sarah smiled softly. Every good thing is worth the hard way. She watched him working in the yard, and when he looked up, their eyes met. He smiled, not the hollow smile of a man pretending to live, but the warm smile of a man who came back to life. She smiled too. The cabin stood strong against the Montana sky. Wildflowers grew where frost once ruled. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of home into the evening air. She had built her cabin one log at a time. He rebuilt his heart one choice at a time. Together, they built more than a home. They built something that could last. Love, not rushed, not forced, earned, steady and real. And it all began when a widowed cowboy stopped watching life from a distance, and a woman refused to let the world break her.